Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome everyone. Inshallah, I'm hoping that people are able to hear me. If someone can acknowledge that, please. Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulih Kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. So inshallah today we'll be starting a new series, and it is titled Scenes from the Seerah. So just a little introduction and a preliminary talk about what the goal of this series is. So as I was speaking to Sajid Bhai, and we were discussing as to what would be a next good topic, and we were kind of going back and forth. And subhanAllah, I happened to stumble upon this book. It's a very nice book. It's called The Revelation, and my wife uses it to teach her Seerah class, and it was just basically lying on the table, and I started reading it, and mashallah, it was so interesting. I ended up finishing the book, and I thought, mashallah, why don't we just go through the Prophet's Seerah in a few lectures. Now, to make it absolutely clear, it is absolute injustice to say that the Seerah of the Prophet is we'll be able to be covering that in a span of a few days, because if you remember, Sheikh Saad did that series and it took him about, I think, 3 years. So our goal is not to cover the Seerah, right? And I want to be very upfront of what our goal is, right? Our goal with this short presentation is to be able to, as a Muslim, know the life of the Prophet ﷺ in a chronological order. Because a lot of times, when we're hearing, you're in a khutbah and somebody's given a talk, and then sometimes the khatib is talking about, okay, in the Battle of Khaybar, right, or in the Battle of Hunain, or Sulh Hudaybiyah, and we sometimes get confused. I get confused as to, okay, did this happen before Fateh Makkah? Was it before the conquest of Makkah? Did this happen, after Hijrah? Where exactly in the life of the Prophet ﷺ is this event taking place? So this book does a very good job of chronologically arranging everything, just so that as a Muslim, we can remember the life of the Prophet ﷺ easily. So that's inshallah what the goal of this little academic presentation or course, if you will, is going to be. So I think it'll be beneficial if someone wants to take notes, because once you take your own note, then that you can always jot those down, and then if you ever want to go back and revisit that, then you can do that, because then that way you can sort of revise the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ in a nutshell very, very quickly. So inshallah, it will be interesting. It will not be in a story fashion like it normally is. I wouldn't necessarily call it a class, because there are going to be a lot of stories in there, but I think I want to do this in a little bit more organized fashion, so that at the end, if we follow through, we'll be able to get out throughout the course, or get what we want to get out from this course is like I said, a good solid base of the chronology of the life of the Prophet. Okay, so inshallah, let's begin. So the author of this book, he does a very good job of dividing the life of the Prophet. And if someone can let me know if this is close enough where you guys are able to see this clearly. I'll try to write a little bit big, but if you feel it's not close enough, then I can maybe pull the computer. So if someone can just kind of let me know that. I'm hoping that it's close enough. Okay, Jazakallah. Okay, so basically, this is the way how we're gonna accomplish our goal. This would be the history, right? So when we talk about the life of the Prophet, it actually begins way earlier, so it's really beginning from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then you have the tribes of the Quraysh. So we'll talk a little bit about the history. Then right before the birth of the Prophet would be the period of the Jahiliyyah, okay? Then you have the birth of the Prophet, and then his early life, which would be his teens, his 20s and his 30s, and then it's going to be the revelation, So that's where he receives the wahi, and that's at age 40. And okay, all right. So are people able to see this, or do I need to write a little bit bigger? Because I'm hoping I'm not writing it really small, because as I now notice on the, okay, a little bigger, inshallah. Okay. So we'll do that. So this is where the life of the Prophet at 40, right? And then after 40, you have 10 years of the 13 years of the Meccan period, right? This is the Meccan period, and then 10 years of the Medina period, right? So this is history, this is the Jahiliyyah, and then this is the early life of the Prophet ﷺ, and then this is where he receives the Wahi, and this is 13 years of Makkah and 10 years of Madinatul Munawwarah, okay? And then in Makkatul Mukarramah, after revelation, we're going to talk about the early Meccan period, and we're going to talk about the late Meccan period, okay? So for today, we're basically going to be talking up to about here, okay? That's what we're going to be talking about. And inshallah, tomorrow we'll cover this. Okay, so when we talk about the history of the Prophet ﷺ, we're talking about from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? So we have Ibrahim alayhi salam, and we know the story that Ibrahim alayhi salam migrates from a different land with his infant son and wife, Hajra, to the valley of Makkatul Mukarramah. And then over there, of course, we have the entire story where you have the discovery of the well of Zamzam. And then Ibrahim alayhi salatu salam comes back, periodically visits his family. Ismail alayhi salam now grows up to be a young boy. And then we know the famous story of how Ibrahim alayhi salam sees a dream that he's supposed to sacrifice Ismail alayhi salam. And then they go through that exercise with the result being Ibrahim alayhi salam passing the test, and instead of Ismail alayhi salam, a sacrificial lamp is put in place from the heavens. And then Ismail alayhi salam is settled in Makkatul Mukarramah. Now, from the lineage of Ismail alayhi salam is a man, and his name is Fihr, F-I-H-R, Fihr, but his title is Quraysh. So people also know him, call him Quraysh, right? And this is where you have the Bani Quraysh, right? The people of the Quraysh. Because we talk about the Quraysh of Makkatul Mukarramah, and this is where it basically starts from, right? And from the Quraysh, we have about almost 8 or 9 generations. Then finally, we come to the great-grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, and his name is Hashim. Now, why is this important? Why is Quraysh important? Is because from the lineage of Quraysh, every important figure that we see in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Whether it's Abu Jahl, whether it's Umar radiallahu anhu, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, they all come under the category of Quraysh because they're all basically descendants of Quraysh. Now, when we come up to the actual life of the Prophet ﷺ, there are 4 important names that we have to remember. And I'm sure most of us know this, but just for a revision sake, right? So the great-grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ is Hashim, right? Is Hashim. And that's why the entire family of the Prophet ﷺ is known as Banu Hashim, right? From Hashim comes the father of the Prophet ﷺ, sorry, the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdul Muttalib, right? You have Abdul Muttalib. And then his son is Abdullah. And then his son, obviously, is the Prophet ﷺ, okay? So this is the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, the interesting story about Hashim is Hashim, when he is a young man, he is traveling to Syria for trade. And on the way, he stops in Yathrib, which Yathrib is the name of Madinatul Munawwarah before it was called Madinatul Munawwarah. So he stops at Yathrib and he marries a lady, her name is Salma bint Amr. So he marries a lady called Salma, and through that union, Abdul Muttalib is born. Now, when he was marrying Salma, one of the conditions was any child that is going to be born is going to stay in Medina, So if you think about it, that the Prophet ﷺ's great-grandmother, Salma, was actually from Madinatul Munawwarah. So, when you think about her later in life, it becomes a full circle. And the Prophet ﷺ eventually goes to Madinatul Munawwara. So she was from the Khazraj tribe of Medina. Now, Abdul Muttalib was born in Medina. So the Prophet's grandfather was born in Medina, and his actual name was Shayba. His name wasn't Abdul Muttalib, his name was Shayba, right? So what happens is Hashim, he passes away. He passes away in a trip. They say that he passes away in modern day Palestine. So after he passes away, then his tribe, they want to get his only son, Abdul Muttalib, back, or his Shayba, I should say, back to Makkatul Mukarramah. So they eventually end up getting him back to Makkatul Mukarramah. And Shayba is bought by a person called Muttalib. So Muttalib was actually the brother of Hashim. He was the brother of Hashim. So Shayba is adopted by Muttalib, and he is finally bought to Makkatul Mukarramah. Now, when people see Shayba, they assume that he is the slave of Muttalib, hence the name Abdul Muttalib. So his actual name is Shayba, but he ends up becoming famous as Abdul Muttalib because he is adopted by his uncle, essentially, the brother of Hashim. Now, Abdul Muttalib was a very special man, very special man. He had a lot of leadership characteristics, and people soon, when he came to to Makkatul Mukarramah, people immediately saw that, and he sort of became one of the leaders of the Quraysh, And Abdul Muttalib, he ends up having actually many sons. So he has a lot of interesting stories, Abdul Muttalib. So there are about 2 or 3 important incidences in the life of Abdul Muttalib. The first thing is, at this time, the well of Zamzam is actually non-existent in Makkah. So Zamzam was there, but a few generations ago, there's a tribe called the Jurhum tribe, and they are basically driven out of Makkatul Mukarramah. And as they're doing that, they bury the well of Zamzam. So the well of Zamzam is buried somewhere near the Kaaba, and nobody knows where this well is, right? Abdul Muttalib has a dream. He has a dream of the exact location of the well of Zamzam. So he has only one son at this time, whose name is Harith. So he takes Harith and he says, we're going to dig at this spot, right? Now, people obviously are confused. What are these guys, doing in the right in front of the Kaaba? So they dig up centuries worth of dirt and they uncover the actual original well of Zamzam, right? The well of Zamzam is finally discovered. And then from then onwards, they control the well of Zamzam. So they become more powerful, right? Because as a tribe, when you now control a sole water source in Makkatul Mukarramah, you definitely have some clout, right? So Abdul Muttalib now discovers the well of Zamzam and they control the well of Zamzam. Now at that time, Abdul Muttalib makes a promise, right? He makes a vow and he says, oh Allah, if you give me 10 sons, I will sacrifice one of my sons in your way, right? So soon enough, Abdul Muttalib ends up having 10 sons. And then one of these sons is Abdullah, the father of the Prophet. So he now has to make good for his promise. So he ends up basically taking Abdullah and he's beginning to go outwards to sacrifice Abdullah. Then the people stop him and they say, Abdul Muttalib, don't do that. If you do something like that, then the people, because you're a leader, the people will start following you. And then it will become a tradition to start sacrificing your sons. And you don't want to start this wrong tradition. So he agrees with that, but now he's already made a vow. So he consults a few people, and then they end up coming with a solution saying, instead of Abdullah, let's sacrifice camels. Oh, before that, he basically draws lots, right? He throws out a lottery to see which son should be the one that he should sacrifice. And it ends up being Abdullah. So once he's starting to take Abdullah, and then he's giving the suggestion, don't sacrifice Abdullah, but instead of him, sacrifice some camels, he starts, drawing lots again. So every time, it's sort of like you could say a dice, in one sense. So he rolls the whatever form of lottery they had versus a group of 10 camels, right? So he ends up doing that until he ends up collecting about 100 camels, meaning the number that comes up equivalent to the sacrifice for Abdullah is 100 camels. So instead of sacrificing Abdullah, he is now going to sacrifice 100 camels. And that's where the tradition of a life of a person is equivalent to 100 camels as diya or blood money. That tradition is where it starts from there. So anyways, Abdullah is saved. Obviously, he's not sacrificed. And then Abdullah, again, he grows up to be a young man. And then he marries a lady. Her name is Amina, right? So Amina and Abdullah, these are the parents of the Prophet. So before that, one last story about Abdul Muttalib is we talked about the story of how he discovered Zamzam. We talk about the story of how he had made a vow to sacrifice his son Abdullah. And another very interesting story that happens before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ is the story of the elephants. Right? We all know the famous story that there was a king called Abraha. He lived around the area of Yemen, and Abraha wants to basically make a place of worship in Yemen, just like the Kaaba. Now, the reason why the Quraysh were a well-respected tribe in the region of Mecca is because, number one, they had the Kaaba, and number two, it was a place where a lot of people, a lot of merchants from throughout the world would come to trade. So this was a place of actual business, right? A lot of people would have a great amount of I'm going to write a little bit larger. I know, sorry. I see a lot of messages right now, so I'm going to try and write a little bit bigger, inshallah, whenever I erase this. So all of the people would come to Makkah to trade. So that's why this was a center of business. So this king, Abraha, he has a problem with that, and he wants to redirect all that trade to Yemen. So he sort of builds up another model of the Kaaba, or another place where he wants now to be the center of commerce as well as the center of worship. So one person from Makkatul Mukarramah, he goes there and he desecrates the place, and then he puts all kinds of filth in the place where Abraha created. Now Abraha gets obviously very mad at that, and then he decides that he is now going to come with a large army, and in that army are a group of elephants, and hence the army of the elephants. He's going to come and destroy the Kaaba completely. So now he is coming with a huge army, the likes of which the Meccans have not seen. So now Abdul Muttalib is the leader, right? And now the people are looking onto him as like, okay, how are we going to protect the Kaaba? So he looks at the army and he says, there's no way we have a chance against this. We cannot fight against this army. This is something that is basically a battle that's lost. We're just going to move out and clear the way out for him, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So Abraha is now coming with his army. As he's coming with his army, there are a bunch of camels on the way. And Abraha basically, takes those camels away. Now, those camels belong to Abdul Muttalib. So Abdul Muttalib now goes to Abraha to have a conversation with him, right? Now, Abraha, as soon as he sees Abdul Muttalib, he immediately gets impressed by him, because Abdul Muttalib is a very, like he talked, he's a very, very impressionable man. And he's got this certain character to him that demands respect. So Abraha is starting to talk to him, and he says, what do you want from me, young man? And Abdul Muttalib says, I want my camels back. And when he says that, Abraha is immediately like, I thought I would think a little bit higher of you. I'm coming here to destroy your Kaaba, your place of worship, your place of business, and all you want is your camels back? So Abdul Muttalib makes the historic statement at that time, right? He says, I am the Lord of the camels, and I will take care of my camels. And the Lord of the Kaaba will take care of his house. The Lord of this house will take care of this house. So he takes his camels and he leaves. And then Abraha is now going to destroy, or going with the intention of destroying the Kaaba. As he's going on, his chief camel, I believe the name of the camel was Mahmud, that camel stops. And this is an interesting point, because this will happen, something similar happens in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. I want you guys to remember this part, that the camel, the elephant stops, and the Prophet ﷺ makes a statement later on. This is during the time of Hudaybiyah. So we'll talk about that when we come to that story. But the camel stops, and the elephant stops, and then it doesn't go any further. And everybody's like, okay, what's going on right now? And then immediately, as it says in Surah Fil, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala bi ashabil fil, there is a swarm of birds called as ababil, and those birds come, and each of those birds has stones held within their claws, and then they drop those stones like a shower, like a complete shower of stones, and then the entire army of Abraha gets annihilated. So that's the interesting incident that happens in the life of Abdul Muttalib. Okay, so then we come to the father of Prophet. Abdul Muttalib has a son, Abdullah, and then he marries Abdullah off to a lady called Amina. Now, there's a discussion about whether the parents of the Prophet ﷺ were Muslim or not. Again, there are opinions about this. Sheikh Saad, during his Sirah lectures, went on with great detail on this. I also agree with the opinion that they happen to be Muslim. And just think about the fact that if somebody has the kind of yaqeen that says, the Lord of the Kaaba is going to take care of his house, and then you have an entire miraculous event take place, there's definitely some involvement of faith there. So the forefathers of the Prophet ﷺ, were likely Muslim. So Abdullah and Amna radiallahu anhuma, they're married, and before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, right? The Prophet ﷺ is not born yet. Abdullah, he goes on to a travel, and then he passes away. So the Prophet ﷺ is born without a father. And then Amina radiallahu anha, she raises the Prophet ﷺ. Now again, there are a lot of events involved before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. Even before Abdullah is married, there's another lady, I believe her name was Qutayla. She proposes to Abdullah because she sees a certain light in him. There's a certain light that people were able to see in Abdullah, which they say was from the light that the Prophet ﷺ would be carrying, because he was going to be a prophet. And Amina radiallahu anha, as she has the Prophet ﷺ within her, she is also given multiple glad tidings that this son that is going to be born to you is going to be special. Now, the Prophet ﷺ is then born, right? And he's named Muhammad, obviously, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Once after the Prophet ﷺ is born, his story now takes a little different turn, right? The Prophet does not have a father, and in those times, the tradition was the young babies in Mecca were taken by the Bedouins, right? The people in the outskirts of the deserts. And for a few years, the parents would allow people from the desert to raise their children. And the reason for that is the desert was a more robust environment for their growth. The language of the Bedouins was a pure language, and the hustle and the bustle that was involved in the city, it was away from all of that kind of strife. So the tradition was the people would send their children, their newborn children, with the people of the outskirts, or the Bedouins. So there is a lady by the name of Halima. Halima, she's from the tribe of Banu Sa'd, and she comes along with her husband with the intention of adopting a child, one of the newborn childs in Mecca. Now, as it happens, as the tradition says, that she comes on a camel that's very weak. And then their tribe at that point is going through a famine. So they're under hard times. So they arrive late to Makkatul Mukarramah. And by the time Halima and her husband Harith, they reach Makkatul Mukarramah, all the newborn children are already taken, right? And nobody decides to take the Prophet ﷺ. And the only reason for that is because he's an orphan. And obviously, if a child doesn't have a father, the finances of that household are probably not good. So people don't take the Prophet ﷺ, or they sort of reject taking this young child who's an orphan. Halima, when she looks at the Prophet ﷺ, she has pity. And she says to her husband, I don't want to go back empty-handed. Let's just take this little child. And perhaps Allah will bless us through this child. Harith, again, a very generous man, he says, okay, inshallah, let's take this little boy, and then we'll go back. And then as they're going back, all of a sudden they start to see that their life immediately changes, right? The tired camel that they traveled back, or to travel to Makkah with, is now all of a sudden energetic, and it's racing through the other camels. Now the people of our tribe, and they see her, they said, Halima, did you get a new camel? You just came in with this old, weak animal, and now you're just kind of racing past. And she said, this is the same animal. And then there are multiple incidences that happen in her life, right? The animals that she had were previously not able to give milk, and they start giving milk. And then when they go to graze their sheep, only their sheep are able to, eat their fill in the land of famine, while the rest of the sheep come back hungry. So many interesting things happen in the life of Halima radiallahu anha once she adopts the Prophet. So now, which actually brings us to a very, very interesting lesson, right? Sometimes when people might consider other people not important, as people at that point didn't really think that an orphan child would give them much benefit monetarily. But when Halima radiallahu anhu actually had that mercy on an orphan child, you look at her right now, right? Right now we're talking about Halima, and for eternity, till eternity, she's going to be known as Halima as-Sadiya, the foster mother of the Prophet ﷺ. So the honor that she got by adopting the Prophet ﷺ is everlasting. So just like that, if we ever come across people who are weak, especially orphans, we should go above and beyond to try and help them, because through them Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can benefit us and give us honor both in this life and the hereafter. So that was the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, and the early up till now, that was the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, before that, before going on to his early life, let's just talk about the situation in Makkah al-Mukarramah, right? Which brings us to the second part. So we got done with the history and the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, and then now we're going to talk about the period of the Jahiliyyah, right? So Jahiliyyah basically is translated as ignorance. If you look at the period of Jahiliyyah, right before the advent of the Prophet ﷺ, Makkah al-Mukarramah is essentially in chaos. Okay, I lost track of the time, so inshallah we'll end in 3 or 4 minutes, because that's around the time when Maghrib is going to start. But just an introduction of the period of Jahiliyyah, and then we'll stop. Is Makkah al-Mukarramah is an absolute chaos, and every kind of ill in society that you can imagine is present there, right? They're just a group of rich individuals that control the economy of Makkah, and then the rest of the people are in complete, you can say, oppression, right? The slaves don't have any position. The women at that time are abused, and they don't have any positions. So much so that if a female child is born within the family, the people were so evil that they would bury the child alive in the sand. That's how bad it was, right? And from a religious standpoint, the deen of Ibrahim alayhi salam, which was the true deen, the deen of Tawheed, was completely corrupted. Kaaba was now a place where idols were worshipped, and people had absolutely no sense of shame. Even while doing the tawaf, they would be doing the tawaf without any clothes. They would be whistling and clapping. All kinds of illegal activity would be going on in Makkah al-Mukarramah. So when the Prophet ﷺ was born in Makkah, you can consider society at its worst, at its lowest point. And that's where he salatu wasalam was born. And then inshallah, obviously, when the revelation happens, things change. But even before that, we will see tomorrow in his teens, when he was a young man in his 20s and 30s, how he would see the society and how he would really yearn for, how can I change this? He would see all the injustices that are going on, and from a general, like a moral standpoint, he would try to help people as best as he could, and then he would also think about, how can I change the society? So inshallah, we'll stop over here. Again, I'm sorry if this turned out to be very academic and boring, but hopefully this was the introduction. As we go on to the further life of the Prophet, it'll get more interesting, because then it'll be more of a story fashion. But inshallah, hopefully you will get some benefit out of this. And tomorrow, inshallah, we've talked about the history of and the lineage of the Prophet, and we talk about the basic period of the Jahiliyyah. And tomorrow, inshallah, we'll continue with the early Meccan period, the early life of the Prophet, and then the revelation and the early Meccan period. Jazakumullah khair. Inshallah, will be time for Maghrib. And if you guys want to make any change in the format or anything different, please let Brother Sajid or me know if there's some other way that we can improve. I'm definitely not writing large enough, so I'll be making that change the next time, so that you guys can see that. But inshallah, we'll try to continue, and hopefully you'll benefit. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.